Hey guys, in this video the lovely Mr. B is going to be looking at angles using trigonometry, so working them out. There are lots of examples in this video, work through at 3 different levels, so you can jump into this wherever you feel most comfortable. And then once you've looked at these examples, you can go and try a few questions for yourself. One place you can find lots of brilliant questions is in the Pearson workbooks. They have lots of questions, various different styles, and all the worked answers are in the back.
Look at trigonometry and finding missing angles in triangles. Now you'll notice at the top of the page we have 3 formula pyramids and we have a set of instructions. So if you don't know what these are, go back and watch the trigonometry video on finding missing sides, where these will be explained in a little bit more detail. But we are going to be using exactly the same methods in this video that we did in the finding missing sides in trigonometry video. So let's have a look at how this works. So question 1, you'll notice we have a triangle. It has a right angle. And we have 2 sides. Now, without reading the question, you might look at this and think, oh, it's a Pythagoras theorem question. And you might find Pythagoras theorem to find the missing side, which is 3 centimeters. Now, if you look close in the diagram, that missing side isn't labelled. What is labelled with a capital B is the angle at the top of the triangle. So we can't use Pythagoras theorem, we are using trigonometry. So for question 1, let's follow our steps like we did in the last video. Step 1, label the triangle. So we have the hypotenuse, that is the longest side, and it's opposite the right angle. That means that no part of the hypotenuse touches the right angle. Then we have the adjacent. Now the adjacent is next to both of the labelled angles. So it goes here. It's next to the angle B that we're trying to find, and it's next to the right angle. Both those angles are on that line. There is a third angle to the triangle, and that's not labelled, so we're not interested in that for the purposes of finding the adjacent. The final label is the opposite, and that's opposite the angle. So it's not opposite the right angle, that's a hypotenuse, it's opposite the other labelled angle, in this case the one labelled B. We need to figure out which ones are important for our question. Now the H, the hypotenuse, is important because we know that's 5 centimeters, and that's a clue. The O, the opposite, is important because we know that's 4 centimeters, and that's also a clue. But the A, the adjacent, isn't important because there's nothing labelled there, so it's not helpful. So we're not going to be looking at the adjacent. So that's step 1 done. We've labelled the triangle. It's just memorising definitions. We haven't actually done any maths yet. Step 2, we're going to draw a formula pyramid. Now, draw these for every single question you do. This is a good way to help you remember these. You have to remember SO, CA, TOA. We can see that in the pyramids at the top. So we have SOH in the first, CAH in the second, and TOA in the third. So, CA, TOA. Now, which one do we use? So for the first question, H and O were important. And only one formula pyramid has H and O in it, and that's the first one, the one with sin in it. So SOH. And when you're remembering SOA, you're writing those letters from left to right. S is the first letter on the left, O is in the middle, raise it up and put it at the top of your pyramid, and H is the last letter you say, so that goes on the right. Now, the thing you're looking for, you're going to cover up. Now, we're not looking for the opposite. The opposite is 4 centimeters, we know what it is. We're not going to cover up the hypotenuse. The hypotenuse is 5 centimeters, we know what it is. What we're looking for is the angle. And you might remember in the previous video, the sin, cos, and tan words are all about finding the angles. So you're finding the angle, you're going to cover up the trigonometry word. So in this case, the sine. Step 3, we're going to type this into a calculator. Now, looking at what we have O over H. That means this is a division question. And actually, all of these are going to be division questions. So we have O, the opposite, which is 4 centimeters. And we have H, the hypotenuse, which is 5 centimeters. So if we divide those by each other, we're going to get 0.8. Is B going to be 0.8 degrees? Well, no, that's way too small. And also, this is trigonometry. We need to be using sin, cos, or tan. We need to be looking up those ratios on the calculator, where the calculator has all these sides and angles in its memory, and we access them using sin, cos and tan. So if you're looking for the angle, we do need to use the sin button. And what we do is, because in the previous questions, the last video, we're looking for sides. In this one, we're looking for angles, we're looking for something different. So rather than use the sin button, we're going to be using the inverse sin button, sin to the -1, which kind of does the question backwards. And then we put 4/5 into the calculator in the brackets. Now, the way you access sin to the -1 is your calculator will have a shift button or a second function button. And once you press that, then you press the sin button and sin -1 should pop up on your screen if you've got a modern calculator. So type that in, sin -1, some brackets will open. Then you can type in 4/5 as a fraction, or you can type 4 divided by 5 as a division. Either's going to work, and you should get 53.1 degrees as your answer. Now, if you don't get that, it might be you've made a mistake typing this in. Double check you close your bracket, for example. It might be that you press sin and not sin -1. It might be that you calculate a different mode. So there's degrees mode, there's radians mode, and there's gradients mode. Now, we only use the degrees mode at GCSE. So if it's a little symbol at the top of your calculator and it's got an R or a G, you're in the wrong mode and you need to go into the mode menu. You'll have to look at your calculator instruction booklet or ask your teacher to help you get it into the correct mode, but it needs to be in degrees mode. Let's try the same thing with question 2. Step 1, we're going to label the triangle, labeling the hypotenuse, the adjacent, and the opposite. Now, if you're not confident with those, go back and watch the last video because I'm going to be speaking through things like this now. What's important? The hypotenuse is important. 100 is a clue. The adjacent is important. 80 is a clue. The opposite's not important. Nothing is labelled there. We don't need the opposite. Step 2, we're going to draw our formula pyramid. We've decided that H and A are important, and H and A only appear together in the cos triangle. So C, A, H. We're looking for the angle, so we're going to cover up the trigonometry word because they always relate to the angles. And so this will be a division question. We're dividing the adjacent by the hypotenuse. So the adjacent is 80 and the hypotenuse is 100. Now, before we type into a calculator, remember we do need to use these trigonometry letters on our calculator. They're going to look up things for us, the ratios of the sides and angles to get us our answer. We've covered up C for cos, so we're going to type in cos to the power of -1 on our calculator. So press the shift or second function button, whatever your calculator needs. Then you press the cos button. Cos -1 should appear on the screen. Make sure that 80 divided by 100 are typed in and they're contained in brackets, a bracket at the start and end. And if you type that all in correctly, you should get 36.9 degrees. And I just want you to notice, as complicated as trigonometry questions can be, think about what you're actually doing. You're pressing a button on the calculator, they're typing in 2 values. So you're not actually doing an awful lot here. It's all about remembering the formula pyramids, remembering the labeling, and remembering if it's going to be sin, cos, or tan, or sin to the power of -1, cos -1, or tan -1. Moving on to question 3, and label the triangle. You have the hypotenuse, the opposite, and the adjacent. Look how quickly we can label those when we're confident. The adjacent's important, that's 5 centimetres, that's a clue. The opposite's important, that's 12 centimetres, that's a clue. But the hypotenuse, we don't have any labels for the hypotenuse. The hypotenuse is not important for this question. Step 2, we're going to draw the formula pyramid. Now we have A and O in our question. They only appear together in the tan pyramid, so let's write that down. T, O, A. And like all these questions, we are looking for the angle, so we're going to cover up the trigonometry word. That leaves us with O divided by A in our pyramid. So again, when we press tan, it's going to be tan to the power of -1. And in the brackets, we're doing the opposite, 12 divided by the adjacent, 5. So press your shift key, press tan, bracket should open. type in 12 divided by 5, close your bracket, and press the equals sign. And you should get 67.4 degrees. Moving on to question 4, label the triangle, hypotenuse, adjacent, opposite. Work out what our clues are. We have the hypotenuse is 80, the opposite is 48, and the adjacent is not needed. We're going to draw the formula triangle. We're using O and H in the question, and they appear in a syn triangle, so SOH. We are looking for the angle, so we're going to cover up sine, and that leaves us with O divided by H. So on your calculator, type in sin to the power of -1, and that's going to be divided by the opposite, 48, over the hypotenuse, 80. Close your bracket, press the equals key, and the answer should be 36.9 degrees. I've run out of space, so let's clear some room for question 5. So we're going to label the triangle, adjacent, opposite, hypotenuse. We're going to decide which ones are important. A is 30, O is 40, and H has no label. We're going to draw the formula pyramid. Now we have A and O labelled, and they appear in the tan pyramid, so TOA. We're looking for the angle, so let's cover that up, and we're left with O divided by A. So that'll be tan to the power of -1, and in our brackets we're going to have the opposite, 40, divided by the adjacent, 30. And then press the equals key, and you should get 53.1 degrees. So hopefully you can say finding the missing angle or the missing side of a right angled triangle has exactly the same method. It's simply understanding that you're finding a side, that'll be sin, cos, or tan. You're finding an angle, it'll be sin -1, cos -1, or tan -1. Now, if you do forget which one's which, you can try both. And what should happen if you try it both ways is one answer will give you a ridiculous answer, usually a very, very small number, 0.0 something, and one way will give you a reasonable answer. So, for example, all the answers here are in between 30 and 70, and all these triangles are roughly the same size. So this kind of makes sense. Moving on to the medium questions, the difference here is, on the easy questions, we had whole numbers and relatively small whole numbers as our measurements. In the medium questions, we've got longer and more complicated decimals to use, but it's going to be the same method. So, question 1, label the triangle. Hypotenuse is the longest side, adjacent is touching both angles, and opposite is opposite the small labelled angle. Which ones are important? The opposite is 107.1, the hypotenuse is 160, and the adjacent has nothing written there, so we're not interested in it, we can cross it out. Then we're going to have a look at the formula pyramids. We're going to draw one for every single question we do. This will help us to remember SOHCAHTOA. We have O and H labelled, and they only appear in the sin pyramid, so SOH. We're looking for the angle, so cover up the trigonometry word. That leaves us with O over H, O divided by H. So on the calculator, we're going to have sin to the power of -1, because we're finding an angle. We're going to do O divided by H, 107.1, divided by 160, and that's going to give us our answer. And on your calculator, you should be getting 42 degrees. And for the medium questions, while the measurements, the lengths, are more complicated, I have designed these to get whole numbers for your angles. Moving on to question 2, label the triangle, hypotenuse, adjacent, opposite. Identify what's important. The opposite has a clue, the adjacent has a clue, and the hypotenuse has nothing labelled. Draw your formula pyramid. We have A and O labelled on our triangle, and they only appear in the tan pyramid, so TOA. We're looking for the angle, so we'll cover that up, and that leaves us with O over A. So, on our calculator, it's a tan question. We're finding an angle, tan to the power of -1, and in the brackets, we're going to do O divided by A. So 60 divided by 103 103.9. That should give you exactly 30 degrees. So what's happened here is that the calculator has done 60 divided by 103.9 and it's got a value. It's looked up that value in the tan table, and next to that value in the calculator's memory, it has exactly 30 degrees. Moving on to question 3. Label the triangle, hypotenuse, adjacent, opposite. We have a clue for A and we have a clue for O. We have nothing labelled for H. We'll draw the form of the pyramid. And we want one that's got A and O in it, which must be the one for tan. T, O, A. We're looking for the angle, cover that up. Leaves us with opposite over adjacent. So we're going to take tan to the power of -1. And we're going to do opposite, 171.4, divided by the adjacent, 103. On your calculator, that should give you an answer of 59 degrees. Moving on to question 4. Label the triangle, hypotenuse, opposite, and adjacent. Now, don't just guess at these, just make sure you're thinking it through. So the hypotenuse was the longest side, it's opposite the right angle. The opposite is opposite the other labelled angle, and the adjacent is next to both other labelled angles. The opposite's important, and the hypotenuse is important. We have clues for both, but we have nothing labelled for the A. Let's draw the form of the pyramid. Now we have O and H labelled. They only appear together in the sin pyramid, so S, O, H. We're looking for the angle, cover it up, and this leaves us with O divided by H. So on the calculator, sin is a -1, opposite divided by hypotenuse, and that should give us 35 degrees. Moving on to question 5. Label the triangle, hypotenuse, adjacent, opposite. We have clues for the hypotenuse and the adjacent. We have nothing for the opposite, and A and H only appear in the car pyramid. C, A, H. We're looking for the angle, cover it up, and we're left with A over H. So on our calculator, cos to the power of -1, and in brackets, we're going to have the adjacent 251.6 over the hypotenuse 300, and that should give us an answer of 33 degrees. Now, assuming it's the second video you've watched on trigonometry, think back to the start of the first video on finding the sides. It took 10 minutes to do the very first question. Now, with this video and the medium questions, it's taken me on average 1.5 minutes to do each one of these questions. You'll also notice that in the previous sections, I had to rub one out to fit in question 5. But now I've kind of condensed my working out down to the bare minimum we need. And now I can fit all 5 on the page. So this is kind of how the learning process works with trigonometry. It starts off very confusing. There's a lot of things to think about. But once you start to memorise labeling a triangle, you memorise SOHCAHTOA, then it starts to actually be quite quick. And again, the only maths you're doing is typing one button onto your calculator, sin, cos, or tan, and then you're typing in 2 values. Moving on to the hard questions now. So with the easy questions, we had some simple numbers in the question, then we had some more complicated numbers in the answer. With the medium questions, we had more complicated numbers in the question, but then the answers were nice whole numbers. But now the hard questions, we've got both. So we've got a complicated question and we're going to have a complicated answer as well. But it's going to be the same method. So question 1, label the triangle, hypotenuse, adjacent, and opposite. The hypotenuse is a clue and the adjacent is a clue. Don't need the opposite. We're going to draw the formula pyramid. We want H and A, which is in car, C, A, H, and we are looking for the missing angle, labelled with a capital B. So it's going to be A divided by H. On the calculator, we're going to type in cos to the power of -1. A bracket will open, and we're going to have 156.3 divided by 200. The adjacent divided by the hypotenuse. And the answer should be 38.6 degrees to 1 decimal place. So again, that took me about 1.5 minutes, and this is going to be about as fast as you can go without making mistakes. So now we've done so many questions on this. We did 50 in the first video. I've now done 11 in this video. Let's see how quickly we can zoom through the last 4 questions and see what this kind of question looks like when you're confident. So question 2, label the triangle. Hypotenuse, opposite, adjacent. We have the hypotenuse and the opposite labelled. So with the adjacent, we don't actually need the adjacent. Draw the form of the pyramid. We need H and O in our form of the pyramid, so that'll be SOA. We're looking for the angle, cover it up. So it'll be O divided by H. So since we covered up an S, it'll be sin -1. And it'll be the opposite, 115.7 divided by the 160. And typing that into your calculator should get you 46.3 degrees to 1 decimal place. Question 3, hypotenuse, adjacent, opposite. We have the opposite, we have the adjacent. We don't need the hypotenuse. We need a formula pyramid. O and A appear in TOA, so TOA. We're looking for the angle labelled with a capital A, so let's cover up T, and we're going to do the opposite divided by the adjacent. Don't get the A for the labelled angle and the A for the adjacent mixed up, and we're going to do, on your calculator, you should be getting 52.1 degrees to 1 decimal place. Question 4, label the triangle, hypotenuse, adjacent, opposite. We have the hypotenuse, we have the adjacent. Don't need the opposite. Our form of the pyramid needs H and A in it, which will be in CAH, C-A-H. We're looking for the angle, cover up the cos, it'll be A divided by H. So cos -1, the adjacent, 210.6, divided by the hypotenuse, 260, and you should get 35.9 degrees to 1 decimal place. Question 5, label the triangle, hypotenuse, adjacent, opposite. We had A and O as clues, and we have nothing for H. Our form of the pyramid needs A and O in it. TOA as A and O, so T-O-A. We're looking for the angle, so it's going to be O over A. So that will be tan -1, opposite, 226.8, over the adjacent, 164.2, and you should get 54.1 degrees to 1 decimal place. Now, I did rush through that, but it's kind of on purpose. I want you to see the difference between right at the start, we're explaining things thoroughly, we're taking time over every single bit, and then at the end, where you're confident, you know what you're doing, and you can do these very quickly. I'm just trying to show you this is not something to be scared about. This is something that you can do quite quickly. So, if you're still unsure, you're still thinking, oh, there's loads of things here that I don't understand, go back and watch the Finding Sides of Trigonometry video and just re-watch everything. And what you'll find is, as you re-watch, there'll be lots of things that you remember already. And by the time you get back to this point in the second video, you should be really, really confident with this.